I can request everybody to take their seats. Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone had a good weekend. I welcome to meeting number 7 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Pursuant to the motion of the House of June 18, 2025, the committee is meeting to study antimicrobial resistance. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. We appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Today, I would like to welcome our witnesses. For the first panel, we have 4 witnesses. Dr. Herman Barkema, Professor, Epidemiology of Infectious Disease, Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University of Calgary. Dr. Isaac Bogue, Infectious Disease Specialist, Toronto General Hospital, and Professor of Medicine, University of Toronto. Dr. François M. Coste-Gouin, Assistant Professor, University de Montreal. And we have by video conference, Dr. John Conley, Professor of Medicine, University of Calgary. Welcome to everybody. Thanks a lot for coming and appearing before this committee on this important study. And all the witnesses will have 5 minutes for the opening remarks, and then we will go into round of questioning. So today we will start with Dr. Barkema. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I got it when I was in Chile, and I came over here for this important meeting. So, as you will know, antimicrobial resistance is a growing global crisis that, if left unchecked, severely threatens our healthcare, food security, and economic stability. Without effective antibiotics, many easily treatable infections in humans and animals would be fatal. And some routine medical procedures like hip replacement and knee replacements and certain types of chemotherapy would pose unacceptable risk to patients. One of the key challenges in addressing AMR is that the problem is not restricted to human health. The same genes that confer AMR in human infections can also be found in agricultural, veterinary, and environmental settings. These AMR traits pose a serious risk to our food supply and create multiple reservoirs that hamper containment efforts. Although the spread of AMR is a serious challenge, there are effective methods for addressing the problems, including infection prevention and control programs, antimicrobial stewardship efforts, and precision antimicrobial prescribing practices. These practices are proven to slow and in some cases reverse AMR trends when applied to select human and animal applications. However, 4 major gaps prevent us from deploying these concepts at a national and regional scale. So, first one, we lack the technology and monitoring programs needed to track the spread of AMR genes and microbes across reservoirs. Second, the health and economic impacts resulting from the movement of AMR traits between reservoirs are not sufficiently documented to justify widespread intervention. 3, there is no policy framework and also no overseeing organization for implementing AMR containment programs across provinces and territories and human, animal and environmental sectors. And fourth, we have yet to develop the cross-sectoral infection prevention and control programs needed to control the spread of antimicrobial resistance across reservoirs. So addressing these gaps opens a path to controlling Canada's AMR crisis. We need to develop a policy framework for regional and national intervention. Another critical challenge is that addressing AMR that our containment strategies are generally sector-specific. But microbes don't respect these jurisdictional boundaries. For example, antimicrobial stewardship programs are siloed within either human or animal health and do not consider environmental reservoirs. Moreover, we lack the policy framework and an overall organization needed to coordinate surveillance, stewardship, and infection prevention and control across sectors and between government departments. This framework will need to be informed by our scientific findings and an understanding of the relevant decision makers in Canada and their respective jurisdictions, a comparative analysis of AMR containment approaches that are successfully employed in other jurisdictions, and a consideration of the barriers to implementing this One Health approach to containment. The need for monitoring and controlling AMR is widely recognized. However, existing programs are siloed, such as wastewater monitoring, clinical microbiology, and agricultural surveillance. Additionally, most surveillance programs lack the molecular resolution, so looking at the genes, needed to differentiate between selection for specific resistance genes and the expansion of resistant lineages. AMR cannot be solved through half measures or sector-specific strategies. I always compare it to a boat with 9 holes and 8 of them are patched, and the boat will still sink. So a unified, action-oriented approach is required to make meaningful progress in stopping the spread of resistance. So AMR monitoring is a routine practice in nearly all healthier jurisdictions, but our surveillance is based on phenotypic testing, so testing on an agar plate where we look at what antibiotics these strains are susceptible, but they do not capture the molecular characteristics of the pathogens.
You can please wind up. You will get an opportunity to talk about things in the round of questioning. Okay.
So some examples of what is needed is surveillance of reference lab data, targeted surveillance of hospital wastewater, municipal wastewater surveillance. We need to determine how much international travel contributes to the transmission of AMR, and we need agricultural surveillance and determine to what extent do animal and agriculture AMR reservoirs contribute to human infections, examine the role of companion animals and wildlife reservoirs, and now I am stopped.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry for doing that. Yeah. We will now proceed to Dr. Bogosh. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. My name is Isaac Bogosh, and I'm an infectious diseases physician and scientist and a professor of medicine based out of the University of Toronto. I frequently treat drug-resistant organisms in my clinical practice, and my research focuses on how these organisms spread globally through human mobility patterns. I'm grateful that you're studying this topic, given its tremendous negative impact in Canada and around the world. Now, antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, arises from the misuse and overuse of antimicrobial drugs, which renders them ineffective, and it causes substantial morbidity and mortality both at an individual and a population level. Now, I see this at the bedside as a clinician, as AMR leads to the delayed initiation of appropriate antimicrobial agents, and it results in predictable negative consequences. But many are not aware that about 70% of the global antibiotic consumption is in agricultural animals, with only about 30% of use in humans. So this imbalance underscores the importance of what's known as the One Health concept, which recognizes the significant interconnectedness between human, animal, and environmental health. And because of this, we need to take a collaborative and cross-sectoral approach to AMR. In humans, AMR is, of course, a massive problem. A recent study published in The Lancet estimated that there were about 1.27 million annual deaths directly caused by AMR, with 4.7 million deaths that were where AMR played some role. Now, that's more deaths, 4.7 million. That's more deaths per year than HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. And we can't just invent our way out of this mess by developing new drugs. In an arms race between humans creating new drugs and microbes adapting to these drugs, the microbes win every time. Canada is doing relatively well compared to other countries, but we're not immune, pun sort of intended. We have national strategies, we have better regulations over antibiotic use, we have infection prevention and control programs to ameliorate AMR spread in healthcare settings. But here's the uncomfortable truth. We can do everything right in Canada and still fail. AMR, like other pathogens, doesn't respect political borders. Resistant organisms can emerge in one part of the world and spread through human mobility patterns and through trade. And while AMR is appropriately framed as a One Health issue, it's equally important as a health security concern. As we saw during COVID, our supply chains for diagnostics and therapeutics are already fragile and may be further strained by growing geopolitical instability. There's an ongoing war in the Ukraine that may be spreading to other NATO countries, with 2 allies invoking Article 4 to date. In this conflict, up to 80% of combat wound infections are resistant to conventional first-line antibiotics, which would pose serious risks should Canada be drawn in. Compounding this, Russia's past biologic weapons programs they're well known to have developed drug-resistant pathogens. So at a time where Canada has pledged to raise security spending to 5% of GDP, failing to integrate AMR research and preparedness into that investment would overlook a critical threat. But it's not all bad. Globally, there are large surveillance programs to study and track AMR, and these are led by the WHO and the US CDC. Unfortunately, major partners are pulling back funding, and quite frankly, global health leadership is imploding. So while that leaves us all more vulnerable, it also presents a major opportunity for Canada to fill this vacuum as global leaders in healthcare, public health with a focus on combating AMR. So what's a smart path forward? We've got to take an intersectoral approach with both a national and a global perspective. A few key points. Strengthen antimicrobial stewardship programs and infection prevention and control initiatives in Canada and abroad, and we can hopefully pull diplomatic levers to help reduce the misuse of antibiotics globally. Number 2, enhance AMR surveillance in Canada and abroad. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can already fill support and funding gaps with pre-existing programs. Number 3, investing in research and innovation in Canada and abroad. This could mean supporting public-private partnerships, enabling Canada to be self-reliant, support for R&D for new antibiotics, rapid diagnostic tests, and even alternative therapies like phage therapies, where we use viruses to kill bacteria. Please ask me about that in the question period. We also can create regulatory frameworks to make this usable. Number 4, public awareness campaigns in Canada and abroad to educate the public in various sectors. And number 5, leverage the security aspect of AMR to fund such initiatives. AMR is not a future problem. It's here, it's growing, and it's a global health threat. We can either act now or pay a much higher price later on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Dr. Kes Tongwai. Please go ahead. Floor is yours. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is François Castonguay. I'm an economist by training and currently a professor and researcher at the School of Public Health at the University of Montreal. I'm interested in improving public policy in various areas of health, particularly antimicrobial resistance, by ensuring that policy decisions are guided by the best available evidence. I work in Quebec, where French is my primary language, but I will be presenting in English today.
It's a huge economic burden on provincial healthcare systems. In 2018, costs were over $1.4 billion, with the potential to exceed $7.6 billion by 2050. Much of this, as my colleague said, is because of routine procedures becoming less feasible or riskier. However, AMR is not just a healthcare problem. It's also affecting the broader economy. Negative impact on GDP could grow to $21 billion by 2050. And the impact on non-healthcare sectors is expected to grow significantly, representing today about 30%, but by 2050, about 2/3 of cost would be attributable to non-healthcare sectors, driven mostly by sectors like animal product manufacturing and labor-intensive industries. This shows how AMR is becoming increasingly multi-sectorial. One current strategy that Canada has put forward is the Pan-Canadian Action Plan on AMR, which is organized, as my colleagues mentioned, around different pillars, namely stewardship, which are measures that promote responsible prescribing in primary care and have been shown to reduce inappropriate usage in a low-cost way. Surveillance using whole genome sequencing allows us to track the evolution of resistant strains and limit their spread. In Canada, this measure alone could save up to $70 million annually. Vaccination is potentially a highly cost-effective solution as well. It reduces simultaneously the burden of vaccine-preventable diseases and prevents downstream complications that might otherwise require antimicrobials. But a key question remains: which pillar should we prioritize to obtain the best return on investment? Economics gives us concrete tools to guide decision-making. It helps us to balance trade-offs between health, economic outcomes, and broader social impacts. Breaking down silos will be essential because AMR essentially sits at the intersection of human, animal, and environmental health. Intersectoral cooperation will add value by pooling resources and expertise across health, agriculture, fisheries, environment, and research, often without big additional costs. Economics should be seen as a key enabler by quantifying benefits, comparing investment scenarios, and ranking interventions, thus supporting efficient, integrated, and sustainable AMR strategies. Previously mentioned interventions can be implemented in the short term by provincial governments, but a promising longer-term solution would be the adoption of an integrated framework that combines economic tools with a One Health approach, which, as my colleagues mentioned, considers interaction between human, animal, and environmental health. One Health generates measurable economic value. By integrating health, agriculture, fisheries, and environmental perspective in decision-making, we can optimize investments and maximize health and economic returns without necessarily requiring new funding. Combining the One Health approach with economics tools would strengthen the Pan-Canadian Action Plan on AMR by allowing us to identify priority pillars of action and interventions, improve intergovernmental and intersectoral cooperation, and find ways to better allocate public resources towards action with the best return on investment. In conclusion, Madam Chair, combining the One Health approach with economics to fight AMR would enable provincial and federal governments to save lives, preserve antimicrobial effectiveness for future generations, strengthen the sustainability of provincial health systems and their economic resilience to future health crises, including AMR. In short, smart economics and integrated health governments can make Canada a global leader protecting both lives and livelihoods. Je vous remercie pour votre...
Thank you for your invitation today, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for having invited me. I thank you for your attention.
Now we will proceed to our last witness for this panel, Dr. Conley. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. I am profoundly grateful for having the opportunity to present to you. I've been working on this portfolio for 3 decades. My name is John Conley. I'm an infectious disease physician in the Department of Medicine in active clinical practice, and also an epidemiologist scientist. And more recently, with my colleague, Dr. Herman Barkema, co-director of the newly designated WHO Collaborating Center for AMR Research and Appropriate Use of Antimicrobials. I'm pleased to say we're the only global WHO Collaborating Center that has a focus on the area of AMR research. Before I begin, I'd like to briefly provide a territorial acknowledgement, because I am on the lands of the University of Calgary, which acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Tsuut'ina Nation and the Stoney Nakoda Nation. We are also home to Métis Nation Districts 5 and 6. I have no disclosures in the last 3 years other than academic and public organization related disclosures. We've learned from the other speakers about the concerns over AMR and what's driving it, and I was very pleased to hear about both the clinical and economic impacts of AMR. And I would also refer you back to the study that was released in 2018 from the Standing Committee on the Status of AMR in Canada and its many recommendations, and I'm sure that you may have looked at it. We are aware that AMR is a slowly moving tsunami, and what many of us consider to be a silent pandemic. It's just gradually moving, it's far out to sea, and we have not seen the full implications. We know that it has a huge clinical impact. There was a systematic review from the WHO released now 10 years ago, and it showed that for the 3 most common organisms, you've heard of staph infections, for example, or E. coli, which is a common infection for bladder and kidney, that there was a 1.6 to 2-fold increase in mortality if you're infected with a drug-resistant organism compared to a drug-sensitive organism. The Global Burden of Disease study from the Lancet, and this is done every few years, in 2022, revealed that there are death rates from AMR directly attributable that are 10 to 25 per 100,000, lowest in Australasia, and 250% higher in sub-Saharan Africa. And also in conflict zones, we're seeing unabated increases. Look forward to the release on October the 13th of the Global Antibiotic Resistance Surveillance Report. Many of us have been engaged in looking at this. I think you will see the results are very sobering. This is the so-called WHO GLASS report. It will be released in 1 week. The drivers of this slow-moving tsunami, we've heard about multiple drug resistance, pan resistance, massive reduction in research and development for new antibiotic agents, unabated and massive use in all sectors of society, which we've heard about, propensity for rapid spread, and the fact that these drug-resistant organisms know no political boundaries. It is agnostic in that respect. We know that it's a huge issue with humans using an estimated 34.8 billion antibiotic doses per year, with a 65% increase between 2000 and 2015. Animal and agricultural use, 63 up to 240,000 tons per year. And we've heard about the interconnectedness in a One Health setting. And we know that there is a propensity for spread. In 2024, there are 1 billion people who took airline flights across the world. So you can see how rapidly, and just from the pandemic that we've had with COVID-19, you can see how rapidly in such a shrunken world, how AMR can spread so readily. COVID has had a major impact. The CDC released a study just recently and showed that there was a statistically significant increase in both bacteria and fungi related to this, and also a systematic review in which Dr. Barkema and I were involved with, published in 2022, showed a markedly increased prevalence of antibiotic-resistant microbes associated with the COVID pandemic. We've also seen significant burdens in society, with the EU suggesting 1.5 billion euros per year and 20 billion in the US. These are direct societal costs, exclusive of indirect costs. The economic impact in Canada was very well outlined in the Council of Canadian Academies report from 2019, where there was predicted to be a $386 billion drop in the GDP in Canada with a rise to 40%. It has already made up to $2
If you
billion
can please
in
wind up.
GDP. And just to sort of wind up, what we need to tackle AMR is for Canada to step up in a bold and ambitious way in implementation. There are many recommendations from the Pan-Canadian Action Plan, from the CCA report. We need to use our digital superclusters, particularly with the stewardship app that was provided globally through the digital supercluster and the Science and Innovation Ministry. We need more action on this area from Canada. Not a lot of new recommendations from reports.
We will
need
have to end
implementation
this,
and
please.
action. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to our round of questioning. For the first round, we will start with MP Ho for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
My first set of questions are for Professor Barkema. So you mentioned that there's no policy framework for AMR, or just a lack of it. And we know that back in 2018, there was a report outlined that sent to the House of Commons, sent to this Liberal government, that advising the government of this issue of AMR, and also calling for the government to take action. So could you just speak a little bit more about that? And do you think that's an issue? Do you think there's any progress on this front, and or a lack of progress for that matter?
Thank you for that question. I'll leave the political issues and whatever for the people that are working on that. So you have to speak to other people about that, I think. I'm involved. I'm the co-chair of the advisory committee of the Public Health Agency of Canada on AMR, and the PCAP, the Pan-Canadian Action Plan, has been released. Now what is it, 2 years ago, and so a lot of work has been done on that. But we also are facing that Canada, beautiful country, love being here, but the reality of our provincials, because health, as you know very well, and agriculture are provincial jurisdictions. So we need to work together in this framework to do this. So it's not only that we would need to work federally, and federally we need leadership on that. And we have, I was involved in a report that we did for the Public Health Agency of Canada, led by Dr. Jerry Wright and Andrew Morris, on what organization we need in Canada to do this. This report is collecting dust at this moment, and you will have to ask also other people why that is the case. But there are ideas on how to get this done. And I'm worried with the current federal spending going towards security, that this important security issue will not get enough funding to continue. That's a worry that we all have in this area. So because as the others have mentioned, with the wars going on and everything, it is important that this gets funded. Bucks don't stop at borders, and we need to look at that as well.
Oh, certainly, and Canada needs to do its part, and it's very concerning to see that we spend $1 billion a year on healthcare research. That's for everything, like everything, not just AMR, just like everything healthcare related. And then while we have those Liberal governments running these massive deficits, now we're servicing the debt to the tune of $68 billion a year. It really puts it to perspective into where the priorities are: inflationary deficits, or maybe solving the next health issue. So it's really concerning to see that, and to see that the community, the medical community, the healthcare community, the public health community has, as you had mentioned, put together this report and it's collecting dust. It seems like nobody in this government takes it seriously. Nobody in this government is taking action after all this time has been spent on putting together this report. So my next set of questions are for Dr. Bogosh. You mentioned, supply chain issues and likening this to sort of the mismanagement of COVID and emergency preparedness. Could you just elaborate a little bit more about, the supply chain issues that you that keeps you up at night?
Thank you for the question. I think everyone in the room remembers the very early days of COVID when we were scrambling to get equipment, including masks, into the country. I think that woke a lot of people up into some of how interconnected we truly are, but also how vulnerable we are when those supply chains are weakened. And I think when we're talking about AMR, we still have to be cognizant of this issue in terms of how do we make diagnoses, how do we treat, how do we get our antibiotics, how do we conduct our surveillance programs, and just really ensuring that we have more self-reliance. I can't speak on behalf of other provinces, but I know, for example, the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario, Dr. Kieran Moore, has paid very close attention to this and has worked very diligently in ensuring that there is the capability or the capacity for local
But
creation.
federally, you're not seeing that sort of level of attention that you would expect, especially when we're talking about like a national framework and trying to coordinate the responses of all the different provincial agencies.
I would say it's a work in progress, and better coordination between the provinces and federal provincial work could improve this process.
But it's like if you're not confident with, are you confident with the state of the affairs right now, or you think
I'm
you just-
uncertain.
You're uncertain.
Yeah.
Wow. In a time when Canadians are facing uncertainties on all aspects of life, and this adds to the uncertainty.
Sorry, your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now proceed to MP Jessic. You will have 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. I first became aware of this issue of antimicrobial resistance as a practicing physician in the 80s, and when I was doing my master's in public health at the University of Toronto. And now we find ourselves here with an ongoing major issue in front of us. So it seems like successive governments perhaps have not been addressing the issue to the extent that they might have done in the past, over the last several decades. Now it's at least heartening to know that our government has introduced a pan-Canadian framework. So my first question is, Dr. Barkema, you talked about the framework. Dr. Castonguay has raised the issue of economics being part of a One Health approach. Would you agree that perhaps the framework should also look at economic considerations?
Fully agree. Me working also in agriculture, we need, farmers are not going to apply antimicrobial stewardship if there's a huge cost associated with it. So yes, that needs to be done. And also we need priorities in healthcare, whether we like it or not. And some of those will be economically driven. So I totally agree with that point.
Thank you. And just going back to the veterinary medicine piece, I believe in December 2018, certain important antimicrobials for veterinary use in Canada could only be prescribed by prescription, only used by prescription, and claims for animal growth or better, in other words, quantity of meat would be not a reason to use antimicrobials. Could you talk a little bit about the success of that initiative and how that is working?
So it really depends where we're looking at. Quebec has taken the lead in this recently, 4 years ago, by letting agricultural producers not use class 1 antimicrobials anymore, the antimicrobials that need to be reserved for human infections, and that is working very well. And agriculture sector has well adapted to this, and we see really results of that. So I think we need to look at that, and there's a role of the government, the provincial government, in that. So we need more. We know that there is an effect of use of antimicrobials in animals on antimicrobial resistance in animals and in people. However, we don't know how that actually goes from animals to people. So, and farmers need to be convinced that this really is the case. It's not in animal products. We know that in milk and in meat, that doesn't play a role. We think that water and the air will play a role there, but we need to, if we want to convince the agricultural commodities to really play a big role. And I must say that the poultry industry and also to a bit lesser extent the swine industry already have done that. But we need more data and knowledge to convince them.
So perhaps the example of Quebec can be used in terms of surveillance and so on going forward to convince other provinces to adopt the similar strategy.
Can I add one thing? So in Alberta we now also have a One Health approach. We have two antimicrobial stewardship. So Alberta is also taking a leading role there, and it focuses a lot on communication. How doctors communicate with patients and how veterinarians communicate with owners of animals. So, that's also a good example.
Dr. Bogosh, as a clinician as well as a researcher, are you aware, perhaps, is CIHR looking specifically at AMR issues as a priority, or do you have any opportunity to try and convince them that it should be a priority?
Thank you. That's a great question. Once in a while, they have priority areas that focus on antimicrobial resistance, but given the scale of the problem, I think there's room for a greater proportion of funding dedicated toward this. And to the points that were made by my colleagues up here, an intersectoral approach is needed. So health for sure, but also in the environmental health, in the animal health, this is truly an intersectoral issue. And I would even wager that the funding available from CIHR might not be sufficient, and alternative sources of funding, including tapping into security-related funding, would likely be ideal, because this is truly a security issue as well.
Thank you. Do you? 20 seconds. I will cede that.
Okay. Thank you. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonker. Please go ahead. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins qui sont avec nous.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I salute the witnesses. My question is for Professor Castonguay. Canada is the only G7 country that hasn't had its own vaccine against COVID. Isn't this the result of chronic underfunding that has undermined our scientific and makes us depend on multinationals for our security in this matter? That's an excellent question. I don't necessarily have the answer. Generally speaking, when you talk about antimicrobial resistance, you have to think about how you can prepare for the future. So it's not necessarily through research and development of new antimicrobials. It's not the only option to attack that problem. You really have to see all the solutions that exist and try to find the best one among them. So I think that's the path we have to take to go forward. However, to get back to your specific question, I can't really say because I don't have enough information to answer you properly. Thank you. In 2018, 1 in 4 bacterial infections was already resistant to frontline treatment, and each one is more and more expensive to treat. Is the underfunding from the federal government depriving us from finding an approach that links animal, human, and environmental health? Yes, absolutely. Yes, earlier I was talking about whole genome sequencing. which can be a practice that is quite expensive to put in practice, but it does bring about enormous benefits, allows us to understand pathogens that are resistant and how they emerged and how they travel from one place to another. Implementing such policies could allow provincial and federal governments to save a back-of-the-envelope calculation that I made stated that by implementing this measure, we could save up to $70 million a year in Canada. But we're talking about one measure among many that we could implement. There are other things we could do. There are many measures that shouldn't be seen as investments because they're going to save money. They're really policies that will be cost-saving, and those are the policies we have to put forward. Thank you. This resistance has caused us to lose productivity. Will this disengagement by the federal government fragilize our public health objective in Quebec and other provinces? Well, yes, if you get back to what I was proposing earlier, having tools in health and in economic sciences would really help us increase the resilience of provincial health systems by integrating both. That's how we have to go forward in order to promote and combat this problem. When it comes to cooperation, it could be interministerial, interdepartmental, or intersectoral cooperation. Those aspects are very important. When it comes to jurisdictions, I understand there are issues about that, provincial and federal jurisdiction, but I think it's important to understand that we have to find solutions to these problems because, as my colleagues pointed out, bugs don't have borders. No, we do agree on that. Ottawa limits the indexation of transfers to 3% for healthcare, but they cost double every year. Isn't it a paradox that the federal government is withdrawing by multiplying conditional programs? What is the place of the provinces in Quebec in developing their own programs? Well, once again, it's a matter of jurisdiction. Who has the rights, if I can put it that way? These are political issues that I really don't want to get into. Well, let's talk about the economic aspect. Ottawa's limiting indexation to 3%, whereas costs are doubling each year. So from a strictly economic point of view, if we get less money than it costs, how can we fight an issue like AMR? I think it's important to have policies that are effective, find ways to implement public policies that will win from a health standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. That is, what can we do to preserve the health and life of people while implementing policies that are economically efficient and effective? If Canada wants to reduce its dependence on pharmaceutical multinationals, doesn't it have to support universities, Quebec and Canadian companies, research centers to develop antimicrobials and vaccines? Well, to get back to my arguments earlier, it's important to understand that development is only one of the 5 pillars proposed by the Pan-Canadian plan. It's not necessarily by developing new antimicrobials. There are other options to consider. It's important to understand which of these pillars, these levers, should be emphasized in order to optimize investment to get the best outcomes possible.
MPD Ryder, you will have 5 minutes for your round of questioning. Please go ahead.
So my question is for you, Herman, but I'll open up the floor to anyone who might be able to support the data part of what I'm going to ask. So, Herman, you mentioned there's an environmental factor to infectious disease. And we need to monitor our wastewater. And it also will lead to food insecurity as well. We do know that the homeless population is more at risk for infectious disease, and including those who are struggling with addiction. In my riding in Kitchener, I was driving by one of our encampments over the summer, and someone had passed in the encampment, and I was deeply saddened by their passing. But I was also even more saddened by the fact that they were cleaning up his area full hazmat. They were dressed in full hazmat cleaning up his area. And I also have another story from my riding. A lady had lost her son. So he took water from our Grand River and injected with the water from our Grand River and got an infectious disease straight from our river in injecting that water. So we've lost 53,000 people to this opioid crisis that we're facing right now. And that's more people than we actually lost in World War II. And it just seems that these failed social experiment policies are leading to more deaths in our country. And so I have two questions to this. How is this drug crisis today contributing to infectious disease increase in Canada? And if you have any data on the actual AMR deaths contributed to what we're facing in Canada today.
Thank you for these questions. I will have to get back to you on the exact numbers. We have them, but and maybe my colleagues have them at hand. My friend and colleague, Dr. John Conley, maybe, in humans, but it is indeed way higher in people that are addicted. We should also not forget the First Nations, because infectious disease like TB, which is multi-drug resistant, is particularly in the First Nations, and there are other diseases where this also is the case. We have 26 First Nations that still cannot use the water on their reserve, where we have to fly it in. So that's another group of people where we really need to look after. So we know that the people that using drugs or the people that get chemotherapy also are more vulnerable for this, but the numbers, exact numbers, I don't have in the top of my head.
Thank you for that. I agree. We also need to have clean water for the Indigenous. Absolutely. So let's go into some spending here. I'm going to go to you, Isaac, for some spending here. A recent report by Canadian Auditor General found that $4.6 billion in ineligible CERB payments and other benefits paid to individuals, and recommended that the government investigate the nature of another $27.4 billion in COVID-related spending. Overpayment recipients included 1,522 prisoners, 391 deceased, and 434 children too young to be eligible. In addition, the report identified 51,409 employers that received $9.9 billion in CEWS payments who did not demonstrate a sufficient revenue drop to be eligible for the subsidy. My question to you is, how could these billions of dollars be better spent for AMR research to help the Canadian population?
Thanks for the question, and obviously I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the data that you just mentioned. I'm just not an expert in that area. What I can say is that we know that AMR is a huge issue in Canada. It's a global issue as well. It's, as everyone here has discussed, it's extremely important to have a Canadian focus, but we can't ignore the global impact of this as well. I often think of it like a swimming pool, and pardon the analogy, but like if someone else pees in the swimming pool, we're still in the same swimming pool. So we have to think globally as well. And certainly funding that you discuss, of course, can be focused locally, but also we need to use our leverage globally as well to help curb this issue.
Okay.
We got
Thank you, panelists, for being here today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We will now proceed to MP McKelvey for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my first question is to Dr. Barkema about environment. And, you know, we know things like carbamazepine pass through the body very easily, end up in wastewater. Once they get into the treatment plant, very hard to break down. Where are we at in the state of science with antimicrobial drugs?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
What do we know about antimicrobial drugs in that same regard for passing through the body, through the sewage system, and into the environment?
A lot of the drugs in animals and in humans are shed through urine and to feces. So they end up in wastewater or in runoff of farms and end up in the rivers. But we don't measure that at all. We don't look at antimicrobials, we don't look at antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial resistance genes in water. The people that work in water are not looking for another thing that they have to check, but they need to be pushed and there needs to be money to do that. So that is really, really important. Yeah.
So, and fertilizer, for example, as well. Are there standards on fertilizer? We know that manure from animals is then spread on farms. Are these the sorts of things that we need to be looking at in a strategy, a monitoring network, and also standards on and testing for fertilizer?
I would have to look into that. Sorry, that's not my area.
Okay. My next question is for Dr. Bogosh. So I know you want to talk about phages. Okay. But my question, I guess, is, you know, we spend a lot of time focusing on the 100 or so plus bad bacteria that want to kill us. We have a lot of good bacteria. How do we strike that balance on disinfectants and controlling bad bacteria, but making sure we're not wearing down good bacteria that can also help us fight disease? And on that, for example, where are we at in terms of thinkings on the environments, open air hospitals, operating rooms, stuff like that? So how do we strike that balance, and where are we at in that regard?
Really appreciate you bringing that question up. That's so important. Like, we often vilify microorganisms, but they're an integral part of our ecosystem. I mean, you know, birds live in the trees, fish live in the water, and bacteria live all over the place, including on our bodies, and they do good things. With the issue, of course, is once in a while they get into the wrong place and cause disease. The key term here is stewardship. That is the key word. Okay, we don't give antibiotics out like Halloween candy. We use them appropriately. When someone is ill, we use them appropriately. And when we start using them inappropriately with misuse or overuse, we run into problems. So no issues with, you know, clinicians or doctors prescribing antibiotics for, you know, routine medical issues. That's not going to impact us if we use it appropriately. Where we run into problems is in the animal health sector, where 70% of the global consumption of antibiotics, that's where that is a key driver. And if we're ignoring that, we're missing the point. Okay, a physician who accidentally gives an antibiotic for a viral respiratory tract infection, you know, it's an issue. We need to work on that. We need to do better, but we cannot ignore the other 70%. And again, if we use the antibiotics appropriately, we'll be okay, and we'll preserve this very vital resource.
And do you want to talk about phages?
Oh my God, these are amazing. Yeah. Okay, phages, bacteriophages. So basically, in the ultra drug-resistant infections, you can use a targeted virus that will kill that specific bacteria. Now, that technology exists. It's used infrequently throughout the world. We have that technology in Canada. One of the issues is that it's tough to regulate. Right? It's not a mass-produced product that has all the regulatory bodies. If we want to use it, we have to go through a very appropriate but timely process to ensure that for that specific instance it's approved. Because antimicrobial resistance is not going away, it is going to get worse. It is not a matter of Canada doing the right thing, it's the world doing the right thing. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. We can get ahead of this. We can start to figure out how to use phage therapy more effectively and more rapidly. And this would be one of many important areas to study. If this is we're looking at science and research, this is one important pillar that often gets ignored.
And then in the small amount of time I have left, Dr. Connolly, I know that we have the Pan-Canadian study, the National One Health that's working. Have you already identified are there some priorities that you would like to make sure that we are aware of at this point?
Sorry, your
yes.
time is up. Maybe
Can you send it in writing?
Dr. Conley, that can be submitted in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet-Bianca for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Je poursuis vers...
I'll go ahead with Professor Castonguay. There are 5 pillars that are important, but from an economic viewpoint, if each of these pillars is underfunded, it'll end up costing more money in the long term. Could you send the committee an analysis of this? And given your analysis, what would be the difference in money, in Canadian money, where we maintain the status quo or we do something about this problem? Well, to be clear, I haven't prepared an analysis as such. I prepared a brief that I submitted to the committee that you may have access to, where I give more details on my arguments. I was giving the argument or the example of one thing I found in the literature, which was based on Canadian figures and UK figures that said that genomic sequencing could be a measure that would save $70 million a year in the Canadian context per year. It's a simple measure. It's something that can be implemented. We have the technology, and that's one example among many that would save money. I think that's the important thing to know. That measure could allow us to save some money, and we know that in the healthcare system, which is really in trouble, we need measures like that that help people's health and reduces costs for the healthcare system. Thank you, Professor Castonguay. You didn't have time to look at other measures? Well, I agree with my colleagues. It's important to have integrated approaches in managing this problem, which is becoming more and more multi-sectoral. We can no longer consider this or take into consideration things in a silo. You have to look at all these considerations and put in place public policies that are multi-sectoral. Decision-making has to be multi-sectoral. If you only take into account effects on human health, for instance, when you develop a policy, it's impossible to implement a policy that's optimal. You have to have integrated approaches to have policies that will be optimal. Thank you.
11 seconds. Okay, done. Okay. So we will have the last 2 minutes each. So for Mr. Baldinelli, and then we will go to Liberals for 2 minutes, and then we will end this panel. So Mr. Baldinelli, you will have 2 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I mean, all of you talked about the Pan-Canadian Action Plan from 2023, and Dr. Castonguay and Dr. Barksma. You spoke about the need to break down barriers that exist within all these government departments. Just looking at the excellent briefing note that was prepared by our analysts, it talks about there's a combination of 14 departments and agencies all working on AMR. And just to your point, how does one get to that point of breaking down barriers so that there is no duplication? Valuable funds that need to be spent in this area could be wisely if it's more coordinated. Do you agree? And do you find that to be one of the issues?
Yes, and I think we need a body, an organization that really governs that and organizes this and brings all the people together. Without that, we spend a lot of time on AMR, and in the years that I am in Canada, I have not seen sufficient progress there. So we need an organization that really, really brings everybody together.
Dr. Castonguay?
Yeah, I was going to say that includes sectors, multi-sectoral approaches, so simultaneously from federal and provincial governments.
Dr. Bogash.
Point and AMRs are.
Yeah. Thank you. How much time?
30 seconds.
No, we'll see that time.
Okay. So we will end this with MP McKelvey for 2 minutes. Please go ahead, MP McKelvey.
Thank you. Thank you to my colleagues for ceding their time, because we did want to give Dr. Conley the opportunity to ask the question I asked previously, and we ran out of time. So just as this work is unfolding, are there some early priorities that you would like to share with us today?
Yes, one very specific one. is a great Canadian success story between the digital supercluster. There was a huge announcement in December of 2022 by then Minister Champagne about a collaboration between the digital supercluster, if you remember, a significant amount of funding, a Canadian company, First Line, and the development of a stewardship app that has gone globally with respect to the AWARE categorization. This is from the WHO, Access, Watch, Reserve. It is now on a server. This is a major Canadian contribution to the global efforts against AMR. It has not been advertised well, and with some directed funding, this stewardship app looks at the essential medicines that were done by McMaster University for the use of simple agents such as penicillin and other agents that are less likely to create resistance. And in the digital world, some additional contributions, a small amount of money would go a long ways in the digital world. There are more cell phones in the world than there are flush toilets. This would go a long ways towards educating the masses and be a great Canadian G7 contribution. So I would say that if there was one thing I could focus on, it is this AWARE categorization that would be of benefit not only to Canada, but globally, and also the stewardship app that's been developed for veterinary practice as well. So that would be my key takeaway message. Go digital.
Thank you, and thank you to all the panelists today.
Thank you. With that, this panel comes to an end. I really want to thank all the panelists, witnesses for your important testimonies. So thank you, and we will suspend the meeting so that the next panel can take their seats. So thanks a lot once again, and the meeting is suspended. Before we begin, I would just like to make few comments for the benefit of our new witnesses for this panel. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And with that, I would like to welcome our witnesses for this second panel. We are joined by three witnesses for this panel. We are joined by video conference, Dr. Rita Dhame, a adjunct clinical assistant professor, School of Pharmacy, University of Waterloo. Welcome. We have Fedora Pharmaceuticals Incorporation, represented by Dr. Sami Salama, Chief Scientific Officer and Chair, Canadian Antimicrobial Innovation Coalition. And our third witness has also joined by video conference from Infection Prevention and Control Canada, represented by Dr. Gregory Rose, Infectious Diseases and Infection Control Consultant. Welcome. Thanks a lot for appearing before the committee today. And we will begin with Dr. Dhame. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will go into round of questioning. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and members of the committee. I'm here today both as a pharmacist researcher practicing in antimicrobial stewardship and infectious diseases, and as the Chief Pharmacy Officer at the Canadian Society of Healthcare Systems Pharmacy. And I'd like to express strong support for this motion to continue funding antimicrobial resistance research and innovation. Antimicrobial resistance represents one of the most pressing public health challenges of our time. Resistant organisms are no longer confined to our hospitals. They're present in our communities, they're present in our food supply, and they're present in our environment. In 2023, as my colleagues have already highlighted, there have been great social and economic impacts of antimicrobial resistance. And in 2023, the Government of Canada acknowledged that and released the Pan-Canadian Action Plan on Antimicrobial Resistance, which set out 5 key pillars. And this framework is essential, but meaningful impact will require ongoing funding and cross-jurisdictional coordination. Now, under these key areas, I want to highlight a few additional opportunities. Now, under surveillance, the Canadian Nosocomial Infection Surveillance Program, CNISP, has tracked resistance trends for decades. Their most recent data confirms that the threat, rising rates of carbapenem-resistant organisms, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, are again continuing to be a problem. This confirms that Canada is not immune to global trends. We know that the drivers of antimicrobial resistance are multifactorial. They're inappropriate prescribing, agricultural use of antimicrobials, global travel, gaps in infection prevention and surveillance, and increasingly research is highlighting the interplay of planetary health or the climate crisis with antimicrobial resistance as well. We're now learning that microplastics as small as 5 millimeters have been shown to facilitate the spread of antimicrobial resistance, particularly the resistance genes, by just providing enough surface for biofilm development. So again, this evidence is emerging on the links. A lot remains to be understood, but it's certainly an opportunity. Now, parallel to antimicrobial resistance monitoring, Canada has also demonstrated leadership in measuring antimicrobial use more broadly. In addition to pathogen surveillance, CNISP has expanded capacity to monitor antimicrobial use amongst both adult and pediatric inpatients in the Canadian hospitals. The CLEAR registry, which is the Canadian-led evaluation and antibiotic registry, has shown that structured data collection on new antimicrobial prescribing is feasible, and it gives us some insights on patterns of prescribing, particularly on new antimicrobials at a national scale. This monitoring to date has been limited to hospital settings, mostly acute care facilities, and that still leaves us some gaps in our understanding of community and long-term care antimicrobial use. On the research and innovation front, Public Health Agency of Canada has begun exploring push and pull incentives for antimicrobial development and access. So again, that includes mechanisms for early discovery research, push incentives, and market entry rewards, so pull incentives to make new antibiotics financially viable and accessible in Canada. It's definitely promising work, but requires more attention and long-term commitment if Canada is going to be able to develop and access the global pipeline of new antimicrobial agents. Lastly, I want to acknowledge that at point of care, Accreditation Canada has made antimicrobial stewardship and infection control practices as required organizational practices for all acute care hospitals. Again, that emphasizes that antimicrobial resistance is a core element of patient safety and quality care. Now, most hospitals have IPAC and stewardship programs, but the depth and the resources vary widely across the country. So Canada does have the scientific talent and potentially some infrastructure to lead in this field, but our research efforts remain fragmented and underfunded compared to the scale of the threat. We'd ask for a coordinated and adequately resourced national strategy that's anchored in the pillars of research, surveillance, stewardship, and innovation. And that's essential if we are to safeguard against safeguard the effectiveness of existing antimicrobials and prepare for future threats. Without urgent attention, we risk entering the post-antibiotic era where routine surgeries, cancer therapies, and even minor infections once again become life-threatening. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we will now proceed to Dr. Salama. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Before beginning, allow me to briefly introduce myself. I have dedicated the past 30-plus years of my research work to the development of new antibacterial and antifungal agents to address the growing threat of antimicrobial resistance. I currently serve as Chief Scientific Officer at Fedora Pharmaceuticals, an Edmonton-based antibiotic drug discovery company, and as Chair of the Board of Directors of the Canadian Antimicrobial Innovation Coalition. It's a mouthful, so we call it CAKE for short. A not-for-profit coalition of life sciences companies and organizations dedicated to combating AMR. On behalf of Fedora and CAKE, I would like to commend the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research for initiating this important study on AMR in Canada. As you've heard from my colleagues, AMR is a global issue. Canada is not unique in the forecasts that you have heard from other global nations. AMR is recognized as a global health crisis and has become a priority at the G7 every year. We are thrilled to see commitments made at the G7 to address AMR, the broken pipeline of AMR. However, Canada is falling behind its G7 peers in implementation of these commitments. As a point of interest, Canada ranks last in the introduction of antimicrobial agents of the developed world. Only 3 out of 18 antibiotics that have been introduced in the United States are available to patients in Canada. In other words, patients in Canada that need antibiotics when they need them have to go through a complicated process of special access program in order to access those antibiotics that are available to their counterparts in the United States. This commitment that the committee has made has a vital opportunity to highlight both the urgency of AMR and the need to strengthen Canada's R&D infrastructure. Advancing the research pipeline is essential, but so too is addressing market barriers that hinder domestic innovation. Without a viable market, these life-saving products will never reach patients. The need to champion domestic AMR innovation has never been more urgent. Canada was home to a number of promising companies engaged in AMR R&D and commercialization. And now Fedora, my company, is one of the very last companies that are actually still standing. The global shortage of new antibiotics and even scarcer number launched in Canada illustrates a clear market failure. Overcoming this challenge requires collaboration among government, industry, academia, and the healthcare sector. Like other areas of biopharmaceutical development, the key weaknesses in Canada's AMR ecosystem are limited access to capital and challenges in moving discoveries from preclinical development to commercial launch. And I will be very happy to focus on that point during the question period. Compounding this problem is Canada's vulnerability in antibiotic supply chain. Currently, all active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, for antibiotics are produced overseas, predominantly in Asia. Given that antibiotics underpin all modern medicine, this represents not only an innovation challenge, but also a national security risk. As Canada increases defense innovation spending to meet NATO's obligation, investment in AMR R&D should also be recognized as contributing to both national and global health security. Current funding mechanisms for early antibiotic development fall well short of those other G7 countries, with no effective programs bridging the gap between academic research. Another point that I would like to address at the Q&A section. With no effective programs bridging the gap between academic research and product development, companies like Fedora risk never bringing their innovations to market. This funding gap also drives Canadian researchers towards better funded fields such as oncology, resulting in the loss of talent to other jurisdictions where more funding for AMR is available. Full implementation of the Pan-Canadian Action Plan, which I was actually involved in both the drafting of the framework as well as the action plan for AMR several years ago, is critical. Delivering on its 4 pillars, innovation, stewardship, infection, prevention, control, and surveillance, requires both dedicated programmatic funding and strong leadership, which was actually the 5th pillar that nobody has talked about. There are 5 pillars in that action plan.
If you can please wind up.
Absolutely.
Time is up.
Canada also needs to adopt push and pull incentives such as the reimbursement reforms that have been introduced by other jurisdictions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Now we will proceed to Dr. Rose for 5 minutes. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, as well as the members of the committee. First, I'd like to start off by congratulating you on your foresight in dedicating at least 4 meetings to this incredibly important topic. I'm actually going to start with something of an anecdote. In 2012, there was an incredibly interesting paper published by a team of U.S. and Canadian researchers where they tested antimicrobial resistance in 93 bacterial isolates that were obtained in some of the most isolated areas in the Lechuguilla cave system in New Mexico. This cave system had been closed off to the outside world for 4 million years before its discovery in 1986, and it was kept free of human contact in the decades thereafter. Despite the fact that there was no reasonable way in which one would anticipate modern antimicrobial use to be affecting the flora of the cave, when they tested the samples against 26 modern antibiotics, they found that there was at least some degree of resistance, and in some cases up to 100% of isolates being resistant to the majority of these modern antibiotics. It turns out that for bacteria, these are resistance is a weapon of war they've been using in an interspecies war that's been going on for millions of years. And we've really only been in the game for the last 100. In the middle of the 20th century, we had, through breakneck speed, developed multiple new classes and multiple new agents of antibiotics, particularly between 1940 and 1970. And within 2 years to 4 years of antibiotic introduction, we were starting to see reports of drug-resistant isolates popping up again and again and again. Didn't seem like a problem at the time because we were keeping ahead of the curve, but things have slowed down substantially in the last 55 years. Clearly, developing new antimicrobial therapies is absolutely key. However, we also need to be able to shepherd the ones that we already have. And we need measures that slow down the emergence of new resistance mechanisms. And we need measures in place to prevent the transmission from one patient to another. These are the fields of antimicrobial stewardship and infection prevention and control. Stewardship, or ASP, is predicated on consistent evidence that usage is linked to development of resistance. ASP activities address resistance by promoting judicious use of antimicrobials, shorter duration therapy, and de-escalating or otherwise optimizing the spectrum of activity. ASP is a growing field. There are several critical gaps in our understanding of best ASP practices. And I have to say, much as with infection control, which is my specialty, ASP, studies tend to be small and methodologically heterogeneous.
to the point that in the December 2024 WHO priorities on antimicrobial resistance research, the #1 ranked priority was related to ASP. Infection prevention and control aims to reduce transmission of various infectious diseases, including antimicrobial resistance ones, from one patient to another in various healthcare and congregate living settings. The IPAC approach to AMR includes broadly acting measures like hand hygiene and environmental cleaning, as well as specific measures such as identification and contact precautions for patients who are colonized. Similarly to ASP, our literature, unfortunately, is fairly small and of heterogeneous quality. Key knowledge gaps lie, for example, in very detailed space of best practices for multimodal interventions. This also is reflected in WHO's research priorities. Interventions in both ASP and IPAC are very complex, very granular, and they're often quite specific to time, place, and patient population. For example, an ASP recommendation on appropriate choice of antibiotic for a skin infection would be very different in a busy emergency room in Vancouver than it would be in a family medicine clinic in the Saguenay. An organism-specific IPAC surveillance procedure would be very different in a bone marrow transplant inpatient unit than it would be in a pediatrician's office. Furthermore, ASP and IPAC both need to take into account disparate considerations that aren't really part of our clinical training, things like group psychology, adult learning, budgetary considerations, and logistics. ASP teams and infection control professionals have had to build these skills through a lifetime of experience within their organizations, and they've developed true subject matter expertise in these. But again, there is a gap in being able to share best practices from one organization to the next. This is widest in crucial sectors, such as community hospitals, long-term care facilities, and outpatient clinics. ASP and IPAC's subject matter experts in these sectors tend to be disconnected from funding and methodological support that is available to practitioners in larger academic hospitals. And this is where, in addition to many of the excellent suggestions you've heard over the last hour and a half, I want to make a very specific suggestion to this committee. Look to possibilities to promote scientifically sound research coming from this grassroots level. One readily achievable idea would be a carve-out of CIHR funding for small cap grants, 100,000 or less, for people who are not in academic centers to be able to work on best practices in antimicrobial stewardship and infection control. A more ambitious idea would be creating networks of linkages between subject matter experts and methodologic experts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we will proceed to our round of questioning. For the first round, we will start with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. Most of the witnesses here today have spoken to the Pan-Canadian Action Plan from 2023, and some have also alluded to the fact that, to the 5 pillars on which it is based. And Dr. Salama, you had mentioned that. Earlier we heard about the need to break down the silos that exist. Again, I make reference to our briefing note talks about 14 departments and agencies are working on this. And just from a scale perspective, how does that work? I mean, is there too much bureaucracy standing in the way? How do we reduce that? How do we better create cooperation and coordination to ensure that the AMR can be tackled correctly?
A question for me?
Yes.
I can only speak to the research and innovation pillar, specifically really as it pertains to products introduction in Canada, to Canada, and also to the innovation cycle that happens in Canada. So I'll just stay within that space. So part of the Pan-Canadian Action Plan speaks to the need for push and pull incentives. Pull incentives is basically incentivizing companies to bring their products into Canada. As I mentioned, there's only 3 out of 18 that have come to Canada. There's two main reasons for that. First of all, relatively speaking, Canada is a smaller market, really. It's the size of California. To bring a product into Canada with such a large geographical size, it's complicated. But more important than that, there is the silos that exist between federal, provincial, and territorial jurisdictions. A drug cannot enter into the hospital setting without having to go through that cycle. So when we introduced the Pan-Canadian Action Plan 2023, we insisted on the fact that there has to be really complete transparency and open discussion between the different federal levels. What has become apparent is that there is that division in the at the departmental division that you had talked about. So, for example, I sit on the Public Health Agency External Advisory Group on AMR, and the action plan is a 5-year action plan. 2 years have already gone. We're into the 3rd year right now, and we're saying there is. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, typically, to your point about the 3 drugs as opposed to, was it 18?
18.
How long is the process to bring one new drug into Canada, to your point, to bring drug number 4 into Canada? How long would it take to do that?
It varies. So it could be 2 or 3 years within the federal level, sometimes less than that. But then it has to go to the provincial level, and it could be another 2 or 3 years. What you need to understand is that by the time a drug reaches the market, the 20-year patent has already used at least 10 years of its lifetime. So for a product developer to produce a drug into the market, they basically have another 10 years of exclusivity. If it takes another 6 or 7 years for the approval in Canada, basically what you're telling the developer is that you have 3 years to make up your investment, which is really very, very small.
Interesting. I just want to move on to the whole issue of the environmental and societal perspectives and impacts. With regards to, the lack of federal funding, for example, not only in research terms, but to healthcare in general. Right now, we're spending more on to service the national debt than we do on healthcare. In fact, the province of Ontario will spend more than the country of Canada altogether. Now, do healthcare practices like overcrowding in hospitals, hallway healthcare increase the risk of and acceleration of AMR in Canada? Dr. Rose?
Absolutely. Yes, I think there's a lot of problems with hospital infrastructure in Canada. For 30 years now, we've had Canadian Standards Association recommendations that there not be any rooms in any hospitals in Canada where there is more than one patient or there's less than one toilet per patient. Because we know that being in the same environment, and particularly sharing the same washroom facilities, is a risk of transmission of a wide variety of pathogens, and in particular, gram-negative organisms. These are bacteria that live in our gut. That cause a wide variety of infections and, in fact, are one of the chief concerns when we think about antimicrobial resistance.
Now, just a question to all our witnesses. You've all spoken on the need for enhanced federal funding. And the government right now, they've talked about asking all departments and agencies to look for about 15% savings over the next 3 years. So what's the impact of that reduced federal funding, considering, the impact that they're all saying that AMR could be a global crisis? What will that reduction do?
Can I just take the first part of this?
Sure.
So I want to reference a recent paper by the Lancet Clinical Medicine, which talks about the fair share gap that exists in funding for AMR. So currently, that paper suggests that Canada's fair share, as opposed to say the other G7 countries, is about 2.5% of the global antimicrobial revenue. 2.5%, with G7 countries. The Europeans, for example, is at 48%. So that translates into about $11 to $21 million annually commitment from the Canadian government. The Canadian government has already signed up to the AMR commitments, but the fair share number has been in discussion over the years. So reduced funding right now is going in the opposite direction.
It's good.
There is no funding for that. So I just wanted to make sure that number is available for you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to MP Noor Mohammed for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing. I'm going to start, put a question to Dr. Salama, and also to Dr. Dami. We've seen that the data shows that new superbugs, antimicrobial resistant bugs, are going to translate to $2 trillion cost to the global economy by 2050. We've talked a little bit about some of the needs and the imperatives for funding. One of the things that I'm quite concerned about is that most of these bugs don't think about land borders or air borders in the way that humans do. These things travel. These things are obviously something that no one country can manage on its own. But we're seeing a tremendous amount of, obviously, rhetoric and funding cuts coming out of other countries, particularly the United States. We've seen a $379 million cut recently to antimicrobial resistance research happening in the United States. What is the impact globally of getting this wrong? What are the concerns that we should all, as Canadians and as global citizens, be worried about with this consistent and rapid erosion of funding across the world for this type of research? And worse still, the attitudinal approach that, oh, you know what, humanity heals itself. We're hearing a lot of this stuff, that things take care of themselves. How would you respond to those two things, and what should we be most concerned about? I'll start with you, sir, and then go to Dr. Dami.
So I just want to maybe put some correct numbers as well, just to make sure that we understand the picture. So by right now in Canada, we're seeing 1 in 4 patients that are presenting with resistant infection. By 2050, this number is projected to be 40%. So we're looking roughly about 1 in 2 patients are going to have infection that are resistant to standard treatment. This translates to roughly about 400,000 Canadians dying every year from AMR by 2050. At a cost of $120 billion to the hospitals, $120 billion and $388 billion in GDP loss. These numbers are very significant. This is by 2050. So when we talk about funding for research, we should not only look at funding for basic and university research, which is really the frustrating part that I have been dealing with for the last 30 years, is that universities produce innovations, but there's a gap between what happens at university level and the drugs that make it to market. Universities do not produce drugs. Companies produce drugs. And in the innovation cycle in Canada here, this gap has existed for as long as I have been working in that space, with really no access to funding for companies like ours, for example. That's why the industry has disappeared in Canada. It's not just a supply chain, it's an innovation gap. So you spend billions of dollars at the universities to make sure that you have great research, and I commend all my colleagues in academia, but unless we have a mechanism that exists today for companies to bring innovations into reality in Canada here, we will fall behind, and we are falling behind. There are no mechanisms that exist in Canada. That's why I commend ICID for introducing HERC, the Health Emergencies Response Canada program. That program has been talked about for a year, and my understanding now is that funding is an issue for that program. So at what point are we going to realize that the billions that we are spending at academic research are not really realizing that return on investment?
Thanks. Dr. Dami.
So in terms of impacts that we would see with the reduction in funding across the board, we certainly are going to see rising infections and mortality, less surveillance, less stewardship, less infection prevention lead to more resistant infections, longer hospital stays, and increased mortality. We certainly, to tie back to what was just said, we are already seeing loss of treatment options. Declining antibiotic development and stewardship capacity accelerates the spread of untreatable organisms. We certainly are well aware that we have some productivity loss as well, right on the front lines, increased illness, reduced workforce participation in some of the most severe cases of infections have become more challenging. And I think overall, when we think about it from a national global perspective, we certainly are concerned the most about reduced pandemic preparedness. Antimicrobial resistance, again, undermines our ability to adequately respond to the emerging infectious threats. We certainly want to be sort of aligned with what our global partners are doing and continue to be a leader in this space and support the great work that has been done already on the Pan-Canadian Action Plan. We want to, continue to support, innovate, and continue to implement the recommendations that were in that framework.
Thank you. And Dr. Salama, I actually spoke at the HERC gathering last week, 2 weeks ago, and an incredible group of people that are trying to do some of what you've said. And I think there is an incredible opportunity for us in this country to commercialize and to really start to close that gap quite a bit. One of the things, though, and I want to go back to the second part of my question, one of the things that does concern me is that there's an increasing rhetoric about working together globally. We don't want to be part of the WHO. We don't want to be involved in, cross-border research. Somehow being ready for pandemics is a terrible thing. How do we get people to think about this differently and actually show them the urgency of actually trusting science and trusting medicine in these areas?
Thank you, MP Noor Mohammed. Your time is up. Maybe this question can be responded, can we have a written response to that? We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonker. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes for your round of questions.
Thank you. I welcome these witnesses. My first question is for Dr. Salama. Canada is the only G7 country that didn't produce its own COVID vaccine. Plants were closed in Quebec and Canada, so there was interest in the Canadian market at some point. Is the underfunding of research in Canada and the absence of scientific sovereignty explain this dependence that makes us vulnerable to antimicrobial resistance?
So I cannot really comment on the COVID-19, but what I can answer is in the context of AMR. So AMR, as mentioned by my colleagues, is not a Canadian problem; it's a global problem. Travel across the world has made it very easy for antibiotic-resistant bugs to travel between countries. The issue that I really see going to arise for Canada is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, is when we run into a scenario where antibiotic resistance becomes really a crisis situation, just like what happened with COVID, and Canada again relies on international partners for the supply of much-needed antibiotics. This scenario cannot happen. This strain is coming. We will never be able to stop antibiotic resistance. Antibiotic resistance is a way for bacteria, it's a natural way for it to survive. They will always resist. All we are trying to do is to slow down that curve so it becomes under control. So when Canada relies for supply chain and for innovation on international partners, then we're back to basically to where we were before COVID. So this is a crisis that's going to happen if we don't do anything. So what we are proposing to the Canadian government is that let's do something about it. We have the time now to do something about it, but we cannot sit really back and wait until something happens or somebody else introduces something. So we have to deal with that.
Dr. Salama, je poursuis pour mes questions.
Let me go on with my questions. We develop new antimicrobials, but they're not suitable for large pharmaceuticals. These were for animals. What role should Ottawa play to create real economic incentives and have domestic centers so that we don't depend exclusively on foreign companies during the next crisis?
Thank you very much. So we introduced two things in the Pan-Canadian Action Plan and the recommendations, the push and pull incentives, and thank you for asking that question. The push incentive is for Canadian innovators to be able to really take their innovations out of universities, and then they can produce those. There are mechanisms that apply. We can put them, such as, we mentioned HERC, but in the United States there's something called the SBIR, the Small Business Innovative Research. We need those mechanisms for Canadian innovators. Newer antibiotics that are introduced on the market, we are talking about pull incentives. Like I mentioned before, the pull incentives is to incentivize companies to bring their products into the country here. Right now, the pull incentive pilots, and we have been talking about pilots, and unfortunately we're becoming known as the country of pilots, where really pilots are adopted, but it takes a long time for the pilot. It needs to be in consultation with industry. The stakeholders are the companies. If they want to bring their products into Canada here, the pilots, the incentives have to be workable. They have to be something that they can work with. We cannot introduce a pilot that's going to make it even more complicated for the company to bring the product, because they will never do that. And that's what we're saying. So what we are saying now, we're asking the government to really stand behind PHAC, Public Health Agency, in working on the pilots and to make sure that there is sufficient funding. I mentioned the commitments that we are requiring that we're asking from the Canadian government, around the $11 to $21 million for the pull incentive to bring their products. the manufacturing can take place in Canada here. So we can be sufficient really as far as supply chain if those products are coming into Canada.
Dr. Salama, la résistance aux antimicrobiens.
AMR could cost the world economy $100 million and $100 billion and $20 billion for Canada. Is the underfunding by the Canadian government into research increase that risk?
Same cycle. So if there is really no funding for product development, there's funding under CIHR for academic research, and there's a lot of innovative work that occurs on academic research in different centers in Canada here. But right now, there's no mechanism. It's not really that there is reduced funding. There is no mechanism, a practical mechanism that can work for those innovators to take their products from the university setting into a development, into a spin-out company. So if you want to start a new business with a new antibiotic and you want to take it into the market eventually, there needs to be a funding mechanism. Private investments, for example, right now have dried. There's no, because people look at the market, the antibiotic market, and they look at it as saying, well, it doesn't really pay for my investment. I spend $1 billion, $2, $3 billion, even the figures for antibiotics, and I don't see that return of investment. So why would I invest in that space? So that's why government intervention is so important. Thank you.
Dans son rapport Perturbations à l'horizon publié en 2020.
In a report in 2024, the Horizon Center stated that AMR was the prime cause of death worldwide and was harming the food chain because it was becoming more difficult to control in plants and animals. If Canada doesn't support
maybe you'll get an opportunity in the second round.
Je vais prendre la question par écrit, Madame la Présidente, comme vous l'avez suggéré.
I'll take it in writing, the answer in writing, as you suggested for other colleagues.
The witnesses can respond to Mr. Blanchet-Janca's question in writing. That will be circulated to all the members. And now we will start our second round of questioning with MP Mahal for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would want to start with Dr. Salama for two reasons. One is that you also come from my hometown, Edmonton, and we are neighbors in my riding of Edmonton Southeast. And the second thing is that you are doing the practical stuff when it comes to industry and making the drugs that public can really use. So that's really commendable. During your testimony, you have cried out loud lack of funding. The funding does go to academia to a certain extent, but when it comes to funding to the industry, to the pharmaceuticals, to the researchers who can actually produce those drugs which can be made available, you have faced a lot of frustration there. You told me that to the panel that you have 30 plus years of experience in developing the drugs. So if you can shed some light on what you have done in reaching out to the federal government for funding on the research side of, not just on the academia and on the research side of the drug development, and what kind of results have you got?
Thank you for the question. In your writing, we discovered Potazo in 1986. Potazo is a drug that's sold worldwide right now, and it saves billions and millions of lives every year. There's no lack of innovation. Alberta is a leader when it comes to AMR research. We have tapped into some federal funding, but what you need to understand, the times have changed. Programs like IRAP, which is by the Industry Research Assistance Program, dictates that companies that will really qualify for that need to continue to increase the number of staff, because IRAP basically pays about 80% of the funding for new staff. For companies like us, human resource is a big issue. In order for us to increase and to carry the overhead that brings into the company, continue to increase staff is an issue. We use different models of funding in order for us to keep the lights on, but the requirement by IRAP is an issue. We raised that with the IRAP program that there has to be other ways to award companies that would not restrict them. So that was one of the issues. Other programs that exist in Canada here really are tailored for people that really have a product demonstration. Product demonstration really means that you have to have taken the drug into clinical trials in order for you to continue, which leaves about maybe a 7 or 8 years gap from the time our company would take the product until it reaches clinical trials. That gap now is unfunded. This is the period that we're talking about, is that we need to bridge that gap from where a product comes out of academic research until we reach clinical trials. Once I'm in clinical trials, I have proof of concept in humans. I'm almost closer to the end. But that gap between proof of concept in animals to proof of concept in humans, right now that gap is not existing.
So, if I summarize your questions, you have tried taking funding from the federal government, but it has not the level that you want it to happen. It has not happened yet, and you see there is a lot of improvement that needs to be done.
I think the programs that do exist, like the IRA program, is due for a review right now, and I'm calling for that really to be done in consultation with companies in order for us to be able to take advantage of them.
So if you have to compare Canada with its counterpart America in regards to designing and approving new and alternative drugs, what kind of regulatory holdbacks do we face here in Canada as drug developers?
From an approval process, you mean?
Yes.
Well, definitely the red tape that exists in the approval of drugs, especially in the antibiotic space, that's really a hurdle right now, and that needs to be reviewed. That conversation at the federal, provincial, territorial level in terms of really drug approval, that needs to be reviewed as well.
Is it fair to say that because of that red tape that also exists in pharmaceutical development, a lot of companies chose or are choosing to go to different other jurisdictions, including America?
So I mentioned there were two reasons, right? The first one I mentioned was that approval process, the time it takes for the approval process. Yes.
So can you also expand on, now you have, I think, about 10 seconds. If you can expand on how do you want that the time that eats out and patent being introduced in the industry? You say that it takes about 10 years to be in the procedural stuff before it goes into the market. No. So how do you want that to be taken care of or addressed?
Sorry for interrupting, MP Mahal. Your time is up, so maybe it would be good to get the written response from them in regards to this question.
Thank you.
And now we will go to MP Rana for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for all the witnesses for spending your quality time with us this morning. My question is to Dr. Salama. So as we are aware, in July 2024, Canada and the European Commission signed an agreement that gives Canadian organization greater access to Horizon Europe. This European Union main research and innovation funding program. This means Canadian groups can now take part in research projects that address major global issues, including health. So do you think Canada is doing enough to collaborate with the international partners on AMR?
I'm actually not familiar with this program, so I really cannot comment on that.
Okay.
The only comment I can have is in regards to the GARD-P program, which is a partnership between several countries, including European countries, as well as Canada. The funding mechanism that exists between GARD-P and Canada has to go through the Canadian Institute of Health Research, which is great. That offers an opportunity, but it offers the opportunity for academic researchers. It does not offer the opportunity for industry. So the funding that comes through that GARD-P program goes through CAHR. Companies are not able to apply for funding through CAHR. So that partnership here, I think, is also in need of a review to really see who can benefit from that. Again, I'm always talking about, taking that innovation out of the university. Let's complete that cycle. So that's a program that I'm familiar with.
In 2023, Canadian government dedicated $19 million to Public Health Agency of Canada for antimicrobial economic incentives pilot project, a 3-year initiative aimed at improving the access to up to 2 priority antimicrobials not currently available in Canada, but developed by the international pharmaceutical companies. Since AMR resistance, AMR is a global issue, how important it is for the countries to work together?
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to that money because I can't really speak to it. You know, having served on the External Advisory Board, we continue to ask for that pilot program to be launched. The Pan-Canadian Action Plan is already in its third year, and that pilot has not been launched. So I'd really like to see that program translate into action, into something that I'm not really sure what that funding, what happened to that funding.
My question is to Dr. Dhami. Did the pandemic accelerate innovation in areas that could benefit AMR research, like diagnostic or data sharing?
So I think during the pandemic, we were in some ways fortunate to create stronger collaborations provincially and nationally with partners in other facilities who, again, were undergoing the same challenges of shortages of pharmaceuticals, shortages of personal protective equipment and those types of things. And so I think we saw the opportunities grow for partnerships and collaborations. We were certainly grateful to be able to share some of our pandemic preparedness plans on a provincial scale. Now, what I will say also is that the coordination between some provinces is much more seamless, given that some provinces are just by nature smaller and all fall under a single health authority. In larger provinces like Ontario and BC, it is more challenging to coordinate some of those efforts. We also sort of post-pandemic have had some growth with monitoring antimicrobial usage across Canada. What, again, I am mindful of is our academic centers, our acute care teaching hospitals have the bandwidth to support research and some of the mandatory data reporting that comes along with pathogen and antimicrobial usage reporting. However, we are challenged that our smaller community hospitals, our long-term care facilities, our primary care usage, our community usage, we still have gaps. And we know that a large part of the contribution of antimicrobial resistance, yes, absolutely, some of it is in the acute care hospital space, but a large part of the antimicrobial prescribing is outside of the four walls of a hospital.
If you can please wind up.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Time is up for MP Rana. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I made an error concerning the cost of AMR. It's 100,000 billion. So my question for Dr. Rose, in 2018-2021, 1 in 4 antibiotic prescriptions in hospitals were considered inappropriate. As a clinician, how can you encourage responsible use of antimicrobials?
Thank you very much for an excellent question. Stewardship is the way. Stewardship, of course, is a broad category of different interventions. We believe the most effective is a fairly labor-intensive intervention called prospective audit and feedback, where antimicrobial orders in hospital are reviewed by a specialized team, typically consisting of a pharmacist and often an infectious disease physician in larger hospitals or another physician, with a conversation with prescribing physicians and nurse practitioners about the reasons for the antibiotic prescription that was given and suggestions of alternative options. The long-term effect of these small iterative nudges towards more appropriate prescribing is actually a more educated healthcare workforce and better overall usage data. And in fact, there are increasingly studies demonstrating better resistance data. Typically, though, antimicrobial stewardship programs tend to run on what we call process metrics. So how many defined daily doses of antibiotic X are used per day in the hospital. It's really hard for a hospital to be able to demonstrate a difference. You usually need large data sets, big research networks to be able to demonstrate the long-term effects. And as Dr. Damier said, I mean, when you're looking just at the acute care hospitals, which is really where stewardship is done right now, you're missing the boat. There's about 66,000 beds in acute care hospitals across Canada. There's 200,000 long-term care beds and multiple, of course, multiple outpatient prescriptions as well. And we do not have effective programs for stewardship in long-term care or in the community.
Le Centre Horizon, la résistance.
The Horizon Center said that AMR is unanticipated. If even a government agency that was charged with warning the government means that we still don't have a coherent plan, what's going to happen?
On prend une question par écrit, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
I'll take the answer in writing, Madam Chair.
Answer to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca's question. That would be really great. It will be circulated to the members. And now we will proceed to MP Ho for 3.5 minutes, and then we will have 3.5 minutes for MP Jessic, and we will end this panel. MP Ho, 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my first question is for Mr. Salema. You said Canada ranks last or close to last in the access to antibiotics. What do you think is the reason? Is it because of federal government red tape that's causing this?
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. The two reasons that I see as the drivers behind this: first, the approval process of the drugs into Canada here.
And that's the government approving the drugs. Right?
This is levels of government, not just the federal government. This is federal as well as provincial or territorial in that case. The other reason was the size of the market in Canada here really kind of works against us. There's nothing we can do about the size of the market.
But there are a lot of countries in Europe that are much smaller than we do. But we still rank worse. So
we are dead last, unfortunately.
Yeah, and so it's not just the market, it's probably the government being the bigger impediment than the market size. And the effects of that, like what are the effects for Canadians because of a delayed access to these drugs? Can lives be saved because of this?
100%. So I always give this example. If you're a hospital administrator and you have a patient that's presented with a drug-resistant, antibiotic drug-resistant infection, the choices are you use the formulary, which is what's available. But if it doesn't work, you have to go through the special access program. Special access program means that the hospital has to pay for that antibiotic. Now, comes to hospital budget. If the hospital administrator needs to decide between an MRI or an antibiotic, guess which one gets priority? So we want to take that stress out of the hospital setting and really present it in a centralized, just like we did with COVID. A centralized.
It's like the government causing this market failure. Basically, the government's pushing hospitals into the corner and having to pick between two choices: MRIs or antibiotics. Using this really lengthy
I can't really give a simple answer. I think giving a simple answer will be an unfair proposal in this case. I think
that's okay.
The topic
Let's move on because I only have less time here. So you mentioned that there's no effective bridge in research between research and the commercialization aspect. So what are some of the effects on that? Is there in terms of economic effects? Is it loss of jobs? Would there be a loss of talent to other jurisdictions that may be more friendly?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is what I have been seeing for years now, is that our graduates don't have an opportunity to go and work on the innovation that they have worked on through their grad studies. So what happens is they either go and work in other disease areas, like oncology, or they leave the country. So that brain drain is something that we see in AMR.
So all that money spent on the research, which is mostly driven by tax dollars, is effectively, I wouldn't call it going waste, but it's essentially there's no return on investment on that for the Canadian economy, because the talent that we invested in will will be going to different jurisdictions.
The talent and the innovation. You know,
And
you
innovation.
spend so much money on innovation, and I know colleagues in academia who had their technologies basically sit on the shelf.
Yeah. I guess, how much time do you have?
Your time is done. Okay, thank you. So now with that, we will end our panel with MP Jacek for 3.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Salama, you've talked about the length of time that it takes in Canada for approval of new pharmaceuticals. Do you see any added value in the provincial process? As you've mentioned, it's sequential. First, the federal government approves, and then the provinces go through their own process. Do they ever disagree with the federal government? Is there any added value in having a provincial process?
I think a unified approval process is what we're looking for, really, where you don't have to go through the two. Because really, I mean, it is the same antibiotic. And, you know, in order for us to really shorten that, I think a unified process is going to be very helpful. Not only that, I think for the time it takes, you know, to get that antibiotic across the line, that's time that the developer has lost. So the developer really has lost that incentive to introduce it to. So what was the second part of your question?
Simply, have you ever seen a disagreement between the two levels where a province, in fact, has not approved a specific...
I don't have that data at hand.
I would suspect that that has not occurred. As a former Minister of Health in Ontario, I had this question back in 2018. What added value did the provincial process give to the process? You're advocating and recommending a unified process, as I understand.
I do, and I wanted to add something about drug pricing as well, and this really is relevant to my colleagues in large pharmaceutical companies that are looking at antibiotics. There's a societal question about the value of antibiotics and what antibiotics provide in terms of life-saving value. I think that issue is really undermining the value and, you know, the fact that antibiotics are saving lives, but they are priced at a much, much lower price. So the drug reimbursement program that we have in Canada here, I think there is a chance for us to really take a look at exempting antibiotic from that drug pricing process, just because you know, to try and compare it to cancer or to other disease areas would not be a fair scenario for developers.
So, in other words, the drug pricing piece of it delays as well, and it really isn't relevant in terms of the actual overall cost. Is that?
I think so. Yeah, I think you summarized it well.
No further questions.
So you had 50 seconds, but with that, this panel comes to an end, and I really want to thank all the three witnesses for your important testimonies in this study. So thanks a lot for appearing before the committee, and thank you to all the members. So is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Yes. Okay, so the meeting is adjourned. Thank you once again.